Hello my friends, Namaste. Today our topic is primary directions, secondary progressions, and fractals. I have made another video on primary directions, so this is the second video that talks about primary directions, but I'm going to cover some different material in this video. You do not need to watch the other video first. I'll cover some overlap, but mostly different information. Okay. Let me give you an intuition about primary directions, mostly primary directions. And I've mentioned this in another video, but just mention this again quickly to get us on this new topic. If a planet is 10 degrees, for example, from the midheaven or the IC, the person often has an event or experience in their life at about 10 years old. 10 degrees becomes 10 years that's related to that planet. So, for example, I'll go over here to Sirius 1.3, and I'm looking at the chart of an actor, Ben Affleck. Okay, and he has a good birth time from a birth certificate. So if we look at he doesn't have a lot of planets near the 10th cusp. Let's go down here to the 4th cusp. We can see the 4th cusp, or IC, goes by both names, is 19 Virgo, Pluto is 0 Libra. That's about 11 degrees, so at about 11 years old, he would have a 4th house Pluto experience. And Uranus is over here at 15 Libra, it's about 26 degrees ahead. So as the 4th house cusp at 26 years old, he would have a Uranus 4th house cusp experience, some kind of sudden change or disruption. So that's the basic idea. And this is something that I've observed doing charts, and other people have observed it. And sometimes you do it in both directions, although the cusps would move forward in time, but sometimes a backwards arc is used also. So Mars is about 19 degrees, so maybe at 19 years old he would also have a Mars experience, Mars 4th house experience. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do, is come up with some kind of forecasting method that would show that, and maybe pick out the time very precisely. And primary directions are an attempt to do that. Primary directions are a very ancient method. It's not explained in the ancient text that we're trying to come up with a method that matches these things. At least I haven't seen it explained in those terms. They just tell you, this is how primary directions are done. But that's how I think of it, as trying to find out the exact formula for when that Mars reaches the 4th, or when the 4th house moves forward direct, hits Pluto, hits Uranus in about 26 years, and so on. Maybe it's as simple as 1 degree equals a year of life. But there are some reasons to think it's more complicated than that. Going back to my PowerPoint presentation here, the reason why the degree equals a year of life may not be the way it's done is because I've noticed, and other astrologers have also noticed, that you get a similar relationship to the ascendant and descendant, but the number of years doesn't seem to work as often as it does to the midheaven and the IC. So, for example, you'll see Jupiter here is about 10 degrees. This is 28 Sagittarius, this is 8 Capricorn, about 10 degrees below the ascendant. If we can do this backwards, in other words, the cusps are moving forwards over time, as I mentioned, but some people use a backwards arc, and if we can use it, at about 10 years old, there would be a Jupiter 7th house experience. But those forecasts don't seem to work as consistently. I mean, you can look at your own chart, look at charts of friends and family, see what you observe. This is mostly just anecdotal evidence. It doesn't seem to work as consistently and clearly from the observation of some people, or at least according to primary directions anyway. Even if you don't observe the same thing, That's what primary directions implies, because with primary directions it's done in mundo. And what in mundo means is you're going to see when Jupiter sets, not when it's conjunct the 7th house, but when it sets. And similarly, we'd be looking at when Saturn reaches the ascendant. We're looking at when it rises, which is different from when it's conjunct the ascendant. And I discuss in mundo in some detail in a video on relocational astrology and in mundo positions. So you can find that if you want to learn more about in mundo. But primary directions are done in mundo, which means we're looking at when things rise, when they set, and also when the planets are conjunct the midheaven in what's called right ascension instead of zodiac longitude. So we use this culminating, I'm not going to get into all the astronomy of it, but it's based on right ascension, which would tell us when the planet is right at that peak point, which is slightly different from longitude, but not radically. You know, you get 3, 4, 5 degrees difference, whereas to the ascendant it can be hugely different. So the idea of primary directions, you see when things come to the bottom of the chart, when they rise, when they culminate, you know, when they rise, reach lower culmination, set, and upper culmination. Actually, the houses are moving, and the planets are kept stationary. Okay, so back to my presentation here. So we use in mundo positions, and typically the houses are moved, and the birth planet. For the planets, we just use the natal positions. That's traditionally how it was done. Now, let me go back a second here. I jumped too far. Okay, here's my next slide. So, how do we relate the degrees to the years? What we're going to do with primary directions, I'll go back to the chart wheel, is using these in mundo calculations, we see how many degrees it will be in what's called equatorial arcs for the planet to set, for it to rise, to culminate, and to lower culminate. Don't worry about all that technical jargon if you're not familiar with these astronomical details, but it's called equatorial arcs. It's the way that it's measured along the celestial equator to see when the planet sets, when it rises, when it reaches this upper culmination and lower culmination. So these equatorial arcs are what is used. Now back to my... So how are we going to relate these equatorial arcs, these number of degrees, to the years? Well, Ptolemy solution going back to the 100s, you know, this is like 2,000 years ago. He mentions primary directions, and he makes it simple. 1 degree, and it's of equatorial arc, which is not how we usually do things in astrology. Excuse me, 1 degree of equatorial arc equals a year of life. So what we get here is, for example, the equatorial arc and the zodiac longitude arc are similar to the midheaven and the 4th house cusp. So for Pluto, that it would be about 11 degrees or 11 years old. For Uranus, about 26 degrees or 26 years old. Well, let's run the primary directions and we'll see this. So I go to the primary directions list. I'll select, Nablad method. We'll be fine. Let me see what my settings are. Let's just do a simple thing. No, no, no. Nothing extra selected. Good. Here's our listing. Now I'm going to pull up a pop-up wheel, little pop-up wheel, so we can see what's going on. And let's look for this Pluto 4th house. Where are you? Pluto 4th house. There it is. Pluto conjunct 4th house. It says 17 degrees, even though it's only 11, and that's because of the difference between doing it in equatorial arcs. Okay, so it becomes 17 degrees, and Uranus, we said about 26. There's Uranus on the 4th, 24 and a half, so it's pretty close. We end up That's the number of degrees in equatorial arcs, not in your normal longitude, and this is what the date becomes. He was born in 72, in August 1972. This Uranus, 4th house, is 97. It's about 25 years old, almost 20, it's July, so he's coming up almost 25 years old. It's 24.5 degrees, so we're getting about very close to 1 degree equals a year of life. So that's how it works. Now when you do it to the ascendant and 7th house, because we're using rising and setting and not conjunct, it works out differently. And in fact, let me show you this. This is fascinating. For Venus conjunct the ascendant, you see his Venus is rising just 1 degree above the ascendant. It says little over 2 degrees. Well, when this number is positive, it means we're moving the ascendant forward in time, which makes sense. That's why Pluto is plus 17 degrees. There's no minus in front of it. Uranus, which is past the 4th house, is plus 24.5 degrees. Mars, which is back here, about 11 degrees, Mars on the 4th is negative because it's a backwards arc, like a reverse arc. But why does it show Venus conjunct the ascendant as positive when Venus is backwards? In other words, I have to go move the ascendant backwards to reach Venus. It seems like this is almost looks like a bug in the program. It should be about -1, but the reason is, again, because we're using the rising point. And even though Venus in our chart is above the horizon, in zodiac longitude, it was actually below the horizon. And that may confuse you if you're used to trusting your zodiac longitude and you think that this is just above the horizon. And I discussed this in that other video on in-window positions. Venus is actually below the horizon. And to show you that, I'm going to close this pop-up wheel. Close this just to keep it simple. And I'll go to Settings, Coordinate System, and I'll change this to one of these azimuth altitude charts. I'm going to use the horizon. These are all azimuth altitude charts. They're showing us where the planets are in relationship to the horizon. So I could talk about the variations, but they're all similar. I'll select this horizon one. I get some options here. I'll click OK. And it's showing Venus down here, but what I want to do is see the altitude. And to see that, I will right-click, select this technical wheel, just because I know it's called technical, because it's got tons of little tables. Look at all those tables of information. So I'll select that, and I'll click OK. And now, because Sirius knows, and Kepler would work the same way, knows that this is a chart based on azimuth altitude, it's converted latitude to be altitude. This is all squashed together in this very reduced image and low resolution. So you probably can't read it, but it says Venus 1 south 33 altitude. And what that means is that Venus, altitude means above or below the horizon, is actually 1.5 degrees below the horizon. So it's not above the horizon. I'll go back to coordinate system, normal, OK. So in other words, even though our astrology chart shows Venus above the horizon in the 12th house, it was in fact actually below the horizon. And you can watch that other video on in-window positions for more examples of that. So the primary directions, because it's based in window, is correct. It's 2 degrees of equatorial arc to get down to Venus, which is actually below the horizon. Okay, so if you find this complicated, it's just a matter of the astronomy behind the astrology, which we don't often get into very much in, at least from what I've experienced in most astrology classes and so on. But it's an in-window thing. It's measured differently than the usual way. And in the in-window, it's based on the rising setting and where Venus actually is below the horizon. So going back to our listing of primary directions, Venus conjunct the ascendant, 2 degrees. He was born in 72. It's about 2 years later. So we get these equatorial arcs where about a degree equals a year of life as measured along the equatorial arc, which is what's used for these in mundo calculations. Okay, so Ptolemy's solution is simple. A degree of equatorial arc is a year. Now Nabod and also Cardan, their formula is slightly different, and instead of 1 degree of arc equaling 365.25 days, they said it equals a little more than that. It equals about 370 days, a little more than 370 days. And they did it slightly differently, so their values are slightly different, but they both come up with around 370 days. How did they come up with that? Well, instead of saying 1 degree is a year, they took the mean motion of the sun in right ascension, which means along the equatorial, the celestial equator. It's an equatorial arc. They had slightly different implementations. And this is also related to the speed of the rotation of the Earth, which is almost constant. So they related it to the mean motion of the sun, which is also related to the speed of the Earth spinning on its axis, which is visually how fast the stars and planets go around in their diurnal motion over the day. So anyway, if that's a little heavy for you, and if you're not used to thinking about all the astronomy, basically they're using the mean motion of the sun, and they're coming up with 1 degree is a little more, 370 days. And then Kepler, Johannes Kepler, the great astronomer who discovered the laws of planetary motion, instead of using the average motion of the sun, he got this idea to use the actual motion of the sun on the day of birth. So this is how astrologers trying to figure out how to match, going back to the chart wheel, let me close this, how to figure out, let me pull up a bigger wheel so we can see it a little bit better, how to figure out exactly when, if this is 11 degrees, if you just said a degree of zodiac longitude equals a year of life, you'd say at 11 years old you'd have a Pluto, 4th house. But using equatorial arcs, and according to the Nabod way of converting a degree to a year, he came up with a different value, as we saw. There was at Pluto, 4th house, 17 degrees. So by getting into the technicalities of the astronomy, different astrologers come up with different values for exactly when those primary directions occur. Now, the story gets even more interesting. So Kepler uses the actual motion of the sun rather than an average motion. And then in modern times, an astrologer by the name of Wim van Dam, oh boy, I misspelled his name, how embarrassing. I've got this is awful, I should redo this video. But anyway, it's Van Dam, Wim van Dam. I'm typing too fast. Oh boy, he's a colleague and friend of mine. He's probably going to kill me for this. But he's a brilliant Dutch astrologer. So he's contemporary. He's very much alive today in the Netherlands. And he got this idea way back in the 1970s, to use the actual motion of the secondary progressed sun. So whereas Kepler uses the motion on the day of birth, Van Dam got this inspiration that primary directions may actually have a relationship to secondary progressions, and he uses the secondary progressed sun. And we have implemented in Sirius a very complete implementation of the Van Dam method of primary directions with his help and with his support. Yay, thank you, Wim. So here it is, the Van Dam primary directions list. And you go in here, you click on that, and there's all these options. This is all developed by Wim. He uses these minor aspects, and you have options to turn those on. Anticia points, zero areas. These are all things that he uses. He uses ingresses. He also gives you an option to use some of the other methods, the Cardan mean motion method, the Nabod mean motion, and there's two variations of Nabod. These are also available in when you select the primary directions list that we've been looking at. You have those choices. But they're implemented here within the context of the kinds of things that Wim van Dam uses. So he's just absolutely brilliant, understands the astronomy, does tons of charts, works with this stuff, and comes up with some new ideas. And so I've got some different options selected here, show the natal house of the primary and the natal planet and positions, sort by date, show the glyphs rather than abbreviations. So I click OK, and there it is. The Wim van Dam primary directions. And so there are the dates. So again, and he's got aspects between the planets, which is also an option within within the other listing that we had of primary directions. So there you go. The Wim van Dam primary directions, using and he's also using another variation of this idea, and he's also relates the planets back to the zodiac. So he's done a lot of creative, interesting ideas, doing charts and working with these concepts and understanding the celestial mechanics to calculate this. Now, one more idea on primary directions is my own. So that's me, David Cochran. And what I did is I used a fractal concept. Only I didn't know it was a fractal concept when I originally came up with it. It just came in my head one day as I was thinking about primary directions, also back in the 1970s. And I was thinking about these different methods of doing primary directions, and is it a degree? And this thought just occurred to me, that maybe secondary progressions, even though historically they came about mostly after primary directions. If you watch my other video on primary directions, I talk about that. But this idea of a day equals a year seems to go way, way back. In any case, here's my idea. According to secondary progressions, a day equals a year, right? 1 day after birth equals a year of life. So let's read this bottom paragraph here. It's as if the universe is programmed to this formula, 1 day equals 1 year. So the first day after birth is a year of life. Well, it's as if this concept in the universe that a day equals a year, that first day of after birth is a year, then I can make that first day a year and get the fraction of it. So in other words, a day equals a year means one period of time stretches out to 365 and a quarter periods of time, and we can do that twice. So we take 365 and a quarter days, and we take the fraction of that, 1 over 365 and a quarter equals 1 day, and then we take 1/365th and a quarter of a day, which is a little less than 4 minutes. So maybe a little less than 4 minutes is 1 year of life, because a day equals a year. Did you follow that? I'm just saying a day equals a year, so therefore the day after birth is as a year, because a day equals a year, so that day is also a year, and I can use the same fraction again. And that gives us that actually gives us exactly the concept of primary directions, at about 4 minutes after birth equals a year of life. And using this, 1 degree equals about 369 and a half days. 1 degree of equatorial arc, very close to the Nabod value, but a little less. So it falls close to the Nabod value, but a little less, which is towards the Ptolemy value of 365 and a quarter. So there's all this astronomy going on. People like myself and Wim van Dam and historically other astrologers saying, yeah, there seems to be something going on. And so we come up with slightly different dates. And as you know, if you looked at that, if you watched that other video, that when you go in here to the primary directions list, and I right-click to look at my settings, I can use the Ptolemy method, the Cardan method, the Naboth method. There's a Placidus method, which I didn't talk about, the Kepler method, based on the actual motion, and then my method, and then there's another method that Rumenkolov came up with based on a lunar year. So there you go. You have all these different choices, and the idea of this video is to give you a little more understanding of how different astrologers have come up with different renditions, different variations of primary directions, all based around this idea that for some reason, when a planet, let me close this to look at the wheel, when a planet is however many degrees it is from the fourth house cusp or the midheaven, an event seems to happen, or an experience. I mean, not 100% of the time, but very, very often that happens. And why is that? What's going on? I talked about how even with secondary progressions, astrologers kind of force the progressed houses to be 1 degree. So you can get these listings very quickly in Sirius. And let's see, does Kepler have? I think Kepler also has a lot of this, not as thoroughly. You can get these values and see if it works. Check it out. So there you go. I'm pretty much done here, and for a little inspiration, I want to show you why I call this a fractal. Probably most of you are familiar with fractals, but there's a fractal image. They're so beautiful, and a little inspiring image. That's just one of, an infinite number of possible fractal images. And what happens with these fractal images is they're created by a little programming loop that sends values back into the formula, into the algorithm as we call it, and the mathematicians figured out a way to portray that as an image. And what happens with the fractal image is as you take little sections of it and you blow it up, you'll see the same image again. So the image is repeated within itself. And this fractal mathematics is a huge area that's been used in many areas of science now. Weather prediction, they use it to find the cracks in like a ceramic or any brittle material when it cracks, and they use fractal geometry to analyze these things. So it's actually proving to be useful. This concept that there's a basic routine in life, a basic algorithm, and you get a repetition of things within things. And so when I came up with this idea that a day equals a year, and then I could take a day equals a year within it, I didn't even know about fractal geometry and fractal mathematics. I had no idea of it. This was back in the 70s. It ends up that concept has become popular in mathematics, that you can take things within things and get the same pattern repeating. So this day equals a year, which seems to show up even back in the Bible, as I mentioned in the other video on primary directions, maybe really is a fundamental equivalence and could be the basis for primary directions as well. So some fascinating ideas. I just wanted to give you some more detailed appreciation for some of the thoughts and ideas and explorations that go on in astrology. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Well, I'll sign off here. God bless. Namaste.